I'm Matt Lewis. This is the news, and our guest today is Dr. Ben Carson. He recently retired as the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital, now a Washington Times columnist and Fox News contributor, and the author of 5 previous books and a new book called One Nation. Dr. Ben Carson, welcome to the news.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you.
Great to talk to you. I really enjoyed the book. And you start off with your, I think, very good but controversial speech at the National Prayer Breakfast. I guess, it's now been a little while. Were you surprised by the pushback from that?
Well, not so much the pushback. I was surprised by the millions of Americans that resonated so strongly with it. And it's almost as if they had been in hibernation and now they're coming out, which is good because that's what is so necessary. So many people have been beaten into submission and really have forgotten what America was all about. This is supposed to be a place of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, a place where we determine the direction of our lives, not some government bureaucrat. And, for me to come out and say that in a bold way, I guess really encouraged and resonated with a lot of people. But, some people think that it was an attack on the president. It wasn't so much an attack on him as it was a statement of the condition that our country is in.
Right. Well, I love your message, and you talk about it in the book a lot. But I'm a big believer in free speech. And, I know that technically it's, the government shutting down free speech is our constitutional violation. But when people shame speech and discourage discussion, that has a chilling effect, and I think it's bad for democracy. And this seems like something you're really concerned about is that we're now living in a world where you can't really have honest discussions or debates because you'll be labeled, a bad person if you do.
Well, that's exactly what happens. The reason I entitled the book One Nation is because our strength actually is derived from our unity and for actually having a vision and a purpose. But there are factions that have been allowed to drive wedges into every crack to create a war on women, age wars, race wars, income wars, any kind of war that you can imagine. And that's, of course, straight out of the pages of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. But, a wise man once said, a house divided against itself cannot stand, will not stand, has never stood. And ours won't stand either. And we have to, as a people, recognize that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. The real enemies are those people who are playing us as puppets and making us think that we're enemies just because we disagree about something. I say instead of, making that person your enemy, talk to that person. You can learn a lot more from somebody who disagrees with you than from somebody who agrees with you on everything. And we need to engage in civil dialogue. And that's how we actually reach solutions. We'll never reach solutions by getting into corners and throwing hand grenades at each other.
Yeah, I agree. I just had our last podcast was with Alyssa Rosenberg, who's a columnist at the Washington Post, and she's a liberal, and we had a really frank discussion over issues relating to race and gender. And it's the kind of thing that I think is very healthy. We see things very differently. But it does seem like the media, of which I'm sort of a part, I guess I am a part, the media, the way we get hits and page views is by stirring up controversy. And it seems like politics, it's smart politics. If you're running a liberal campaign and you need to stir up your base, dividing people and making them think that these Republicans are coming after you, that's a good strategy. So it seems like we're fighting an uphill battle trying to bring back civility.
It is an uphill battle, but what I want people to do, and as I've emphasized in the book strongly, keep calling whoever it is, I don't care if they're on the right or the left, call them back to the actual issue. Call them back to the actual solutions. We have too many problems to be engaged in silly arguments. We need to find solutions here. And, name calling is just, absurd. Leave that on the first grade playground.
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to dwell too much on the speech because the book has a lot of stuff I want to talk about. But the one thing about the speech that I did want to ask you, because it was wide ranging, and you talked about a lot of things that I think were very uniting, including your upbringing and how your mom required you to read books, and how important I think that is as a father myself. But you did talk about the economy and the debt and the deficit, which some people felt it's clearly a legitimate issue, but maybe not appropriate for a prayer breakfast. If you had it to do over, would you have left that part out?
Definitely not. I think it's critical because, we're also talking about, the state of our nation, spiritually, morally, and debt is a moral issue. Look at what our founding fathers said about it. Thomas Jefferson said it was immoral to leave debt to the next generation. And we're doing it in spades. And having grown up in Detroit, I'm particularly sensitive to this because that used to be the most prosperous city in America, and now it's the largest bankruptcy. Fiscal irresponsibility. And it is totally unfair to neglect the next generation and to say, we don't care what happens to them, just give me mine now.
Okay, so I got to ask, you're from Detroit, you lived in Boston, you worked in Baltimore. Tigers, Red Sox, or Orioles?
Well, I love the Orioles, but I still like the Tigers too.
Well, Tom LeDuc, my producer, will be very happy. He's a huge Detroit fan. Okay, well let's dig into the book a little bit more. There were a lot of interesting things in there that I didn't know about you. And one of the stories is that you actually stabbed a classmate, which
yes.
Which is interesting. If you would talk a little bit about that and why it was significant to you turning your life around.
Well, I had real anger issues. I would just fly off the handle and really become quite irrational and try to hurt people with baseball bats, hammers, whatever. In this particular case, I happen to have a large camping knife. And, one of my friends angered me, and I just lunged at his abdomen with the knife. Probably would have seriously injured or killed him, but he happened to have on a large metal belt buckle under his clothing, upon which the blade broke. And, of course, he fled in terror, but I was more horrified than he was because I realized that I was trying to kill somebody over nothing, and that I would never realize my dreams of becoming a physician. And I would end up in jail, reform school, or the grave. And I just, locked myself in the bathroom and started praying. And there was a Bible, and I opened it to the book of Proverbs and had all these verses about fools and people who get angry. And it seemed like they were all written about me. And after 3 hours of contemplating, reading, and praying, I came to the understanding that to lash out at somebody was not a sign of strength. Rather, it was a sign of weakness. It meant you could be easily manipulated. And I said, do I want to go through my life being manipulated by people and reacting? And I also came to understand that it was due to selfishness. It's always about me, my, and I. Somebody's in my space, somebody took my thing. And I said, if you learn how to step outside of the center of the circle, you won't get angry. When I came out of that bathroom after 3 hours, the anger was gone. I've never had another episode.
It's interesting. I've not stabbed anybody, but I have had similar experiences. Winston Churchill said something like, there's nothing more exhilarating than being shot at without effect. But there's also something very chastening about almost having shot at somebody, almost having done something to hurt somebody that would have changed your life. And I mean, all of the good that you did as a surgeon would have been risked.
Yeah.
I had another experience. You talk about shooting a bird in the book, where I shot a bunny and had never done that again. And I had a similar experience. But wow, it's very heavy when you consider that had he not been wearing that belt, you could be in jail today instead of being like.
And it's also very ironic that what could have ended a life for me ended up being what gave life to thousands, a scalpel.
That is amazing. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. In the book, you talk several times, in layman's terms, but about things that happened in the operating room. And there's one story where you think you know how to save, I think it's conjoined twins,
Uh-huh.
and there's someone else in the operating room with you who has an expertise that surpasses yours in this certain area, and you defer to that person, and they were wrong, and what that taught you about the courage, sticking to the courage of your convictions going forward.
Right, exactly. Because in this case, it was a pacemaker. I wanted to put in a cardiac pacemaker because one of the twins demonstrated that they had a weak heart. Every time we would try to do something, and anesthesia-wise, there would be a problem. So I suggested maybe we put in a pacemaker, and this person said, "No, that's overkill. We don't need to do that." It turns out that it probably would have saved that child, but I said, well, this is the expert, and I know something about it, but he knows the most, so I'll defer to him. And that was the wrong decision. What I should have done is collected a number of more opinions, and I think that's a general principle. When you disagree, don't just necessarily say, well, my opinion is better or his opinion is better. Get some more opinions. The Bible says in Proverbs 11:14, in the multitude of counselors is safety.
I like that, and I have to say, as presidents need to hear this and need to learn this. Just because a general says we need to do this, you shouldn't just automatically defer to their expertise if you're the commander in chief.
Exactly, and particularly in a nation like ours. We have so many incredibly smart, wise people in so many areas. There's almost no reason for us to make big blunders. But the person who has the ultimate decision-making capacity needs to have enough humility to admit that.
I want to ask you about some of the things that I read in the book that struck me as a little bit surprising. And I think that people assume you are a hardcore crazy right winger, fair or not. And in the book, there were things that you write about. For example, you thought it was a mistake to repeal Glass-Steagall, which was a regulation that was put in after the Great Depression. You talk about homophobia and say that there's been a long and shameful history of gay bashing in America that thankfully is waning. And you seem to sort of take sides with Trayvon Martin, or at least you say that you identify with him, having been a young black man who was maybe mistrusted wrongfully. Are you more? Have you become a caricature of the right when you're actually more complex and maybe a little more moderate?
What I say is I'm neither liberal conservative. I don't want to be put in a box other than the box of somebody who uses common sense, who can actually think for themselves, who can look at each individual situation, analyze it, and try to do what is right. Some people are surprised that I, am not, full-fledged behind health insurance companies. They said because if you're conservative, then you must be behind the insurance companies. Well, I actually don't like the fact that that's a major pillar of our healthcare system. Insurance companies who make money by denying people care. That doesn't make any sense as far as I'm concerned. That's a conflict of interest. And we have to put first things first. The first thing we need to do is make sure that people get their healthcare needs taken care of. As far as, regulations are concerned, yes, I think there are way too many regulations, but that doesn't mean you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And, Glass-Steagall, kept banks from doing inappropriate, risky investments of people's hard-earned cash. That made absolutely good sense.
Well, I want to ask you about the insurance thing, because you write in the book that that you were trying to get an insurance company to cover a a procedure for a patient, and they wouldn't do it because it would cost too much. And I'm wondering if your experience as a doctor informs your concern. Was this a common thing where insurance companies were not approving things they should have because they were pinching pennies?
Oh yeah, every doctor can tell you about those situations. And you get on the phone and you talk to the person who's the gatekeeper, and they don't even know what you're talking about. It's almost hilarious, and that's why we need better systems of dealing with this. And some of the things that I've been working with members of Congress and physician groups, puts people's health care back into their own hands. Is going to be a much more effective way of doing things, and it'll bring the healthcare system into the free market economic system. That's what controls pricing, and that's what controls quality.
Yeah, if you would talk a little bit about that. I know you're a big proponent of health savings accounts and the belief that that people should essentially be born with a health savings account. I know there are some concerns. At least I'm guessing there are concerns about privacy and security of this sort of information. But how would you, if you were to design a health insurance plan from scratch, if we weren't sort of, and if we didn't inherit the current system, but
Sure.
if you were to design one today, how would you do it?
Well, starting at birth, everybody would have a health savings account over which they or their designee, in the case of children or infirmed people, would have a say. So if you sprain your ankle and there was a question of getting an x-ray, that comes out of your HSA, your health savings account. Or if you need a physical exam for a new job, that comes out of your HSA. Birth control pills, HSA, so you don't have any Hobby Lobby type situation. 80+% of all your encounters are going to come out of your HSA. Your catastrophic or bridge insurance will only be used truly for major issues. And that's going to drop the cost of your health insurance, your catastrophic insurance, dramatically. Also making it possible to buy that catastrophic insurance across state lines, make it truly competitive. That's what I meant by, bringing the whole healthcare system into the free market economic system. That controls pricing. You also will give people the ability to shift money within their health savings account. The father needs an extra $500. It can come out of his wife. She can donate it to him, or his daughter, or his grandfather, anybody in the family, which essentially makes every family their own insurance company with no middleman. Gives you enormous flexibility. Very few things you're not going to be able to cover. And then, there's that 5% of people who have complex pre-existing conditions and other kinds of things. They go into a different system. A Medicare, Medicaid /type system has no impact on the other 95% of people.
I love it. I wish we did that. I want to touch a little bit more on race because you do talk about it in the book, and as I mentioned, you talk about the Trayvon Martin case and that you could identify with him a little bit. I'm wondering if you could talk to us about that, and then just where do you think we are today? Are things better? Are things getting better? How can we make them better?
Well, I believe that we put far too much emphasis on race, and it's gotten to be worse over the last few years than it used to be. And I was asked by a reporter once, "Why don't you talk about race very often?" I said, "It's because I'm a neurosurgeon." And that occasioned a curious look. And I said, "You see, when I open someone's head up, I'm actually operating on the thing that makes that person who they are. The skin doesn't make them who they are. And, if you're a very superficial thinker, skin means a lot to you. If you're a deep thinker, it's the individual and what they think that means much more to you."
Right. Well, you talk in the book about how when you were starting out, you would walk into an operating room or a patient to see a patient, and the nurse would assume that you were, there to transport them somewhere else.
Right.
but that you weren't the doctor. And you handled that with grace. And I thought if you would talk about that, because I thought that was
Sure.
you had the right attitude, I think, about it, and I think that you probably brought people together as opposed to tearing them apart.
Well, I would go on the ward, and the nurse would think that I was an orderly coming to pick somebody up and say, "I'm sorry, but Mr. Brown isn't quite ready to be taken to the OR yet." And I would say, "Well, gee, I'm sorry that's the case, but I'm Dr. Carson." And they would turn about 18 shades of red, and I would say, "Yeah, you don't need to be embarrassed. It's okay." And I would be very nice to them, and I had a friend for life. But, I would recognize that from their perspective, the only black man they had ever seen come on the wards with scrubs on was an orderly. So why would they think something else? People do and say things based on their experience. And you just have to be big enough to be able to recognize that. That's also something that helps me from reacting angrily to people who are just totally absurd. I just look at them and I say, that used to be a cute little baby. I wonder what happened to them.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you for coming on. It was terrific. The book is called One Nation, What We Can All Do to Save America's Future. Dr. Ben Carson, thanks for coming on the news.
It is my pleasure.